Hi everyone, and thank you so much for watching my channel The Witty Turtle. In the last class of linear programming, we had already discussed about what are the benefits of linear programming, what do you mean by linear programming, and from this class onwards we will start with the theory and also the numericals whichever is there in both old and new syllabus of CMA intermediate, right? So without any further delay, let's start with the video. So what do you mean by linear programming? We had already learned that it is to process a linear equation, right? A linear equation can be a smaller one and it can also be a bigger one. So it says that linear programming is a mathematical model dealing with the use or allocation of certain limited resources. We have already learned that to manufacture a finished good, we need some raw materials, and of course, not every raw material will be abundantly available. Some of them will be limited resources, or we can say some of them will be scarcely available. कम quantity में available होगा, right? For example, key factor like raw material, labor hours. Of course, we know that there is a very shortage of labor, right? So labor hours can also be a key factor. Also machine hours. Whatever machine we have, how much time the machine can run, all these things come under the case of key factor. It can be limited resource, right? In the best possible manner in order to maximize profit or minimize cost. So in the last class only we had learned that the objective of any linear programming is either to minimize the cost or minimize the time and to maximize the sales, maximize the revenue, maximize the profit, right? Either of these 5 possibilities are there. Now, another thing is that LPP consists of particular class of programming problems which meets the following conditions. So, whenever we are talking about linear programming, we also need to understand that there are 3 parts of any linear programming. How many parts? 3 parts, right? The first part is objective. Objective means क्या होता है? There must be a defined objective. It is either maximization of profit or revenue or income or the minimization of cost or time. This we have already learned, right? The objective function is denoted by Z. Z or Z, जो भी आप बोलते हो. So, what is the meaning of objective here? So whenever we are processing a particular thing, a particular linear equation, why are we doing that? We should have some objective in our mind, right? So that particular objective is known as your objective function. Whenever we are solving any kind of problem, not only linear programming but also any transportation or assignment or any problem, we have a particular target, we have a particular objective where we have to reach, right? So that is your objective function. The objective function should be defined by use of a linear function involving a decision variable. So it says that your objective function, you can write it in words, and also you have to define the objective function in a linear equation or a linear function involving the decision variables, right? Decision variable. Now, what is the meaning of this decision variable? For example, raw material is the key factor in this case. So, there are 2 raw materials involved, X and Y. So, in this case, what happens? Your raw material X and Y, both of them are your decision variables. How much quantity you have to use for 1 unit of finished good, all those things are decision variables. Once we start solving the questions, you will understand this. Now, coming to the next point, that is your variables. We learned that out of the 3 conditions, the first one was objective function, the second one is variables. So, there must be decision variables. What is the meaning of decision variables? I told you just now. It can be either products, it can be time, or it can be processes involved. The processes involved to manufacture a finished good, right? Etc., which the decision makers may use at different levels. So, when we are manufacturing a particular product, there are a lot of processes involved, right? So at different levels, at different processes, we need to perform different kind of work, right? So all those things are known as decision variable. These must be non-negative. So all these decision variables must be non-negative. Understood? These variables may be denoted by alphabets like A, B, C, or X1 or X2 or X3 or maybe XYZ, like that. So before understanding that, first let's do this. So in any linear programming, what is the objective? Maximization of sales, revenue, profit, minimization of cost or time. The object is denoted by Z or Z. So we have to write it like this: maximization. If the objective is to maximize the all these three things, then the object function is written as max Z or maximize Z. Okay, and if the objective is to minimize, then you have to write minimize Z or or like this min Z, right? So here we can take this particular example where the profit of product X is 30 and the profit of product Y is 10, right? So what will be the total profit? If we are considering that there will be X units of product X and Y units of product Y, then what happens? In this case, the total profit will be 30 into number of units of X, that is X we have taken, and profit of Y multiplied with number of units of Y, that is Y in this case we have taken, right? So in this case, what is our objective? Whenever we see there is a profit involved, so in this case, what shall be our objective function? It is to maximize the profit. So our objective function, as I have already told you, that objective function is written either in words or in this kind of linear equation, linear function. So even if you're not writing in words, that is fine, but you have to write in this linear function, in this linear equation format, right? So this is very important and mandatory, right? So the objective function is maximize Z, that is equal to 30. 30 is the profit of one unit, and X is the number of units of product X. Then 10 is the profit of one unit of Y, and this small y is the number of units of product Y, right? So this is your objective function. Now coming to the next part, that is your constraints. So what do you mean by constraints? Constraints मतलब होता है any kind of limiting factor or any kind of key factor or any kind of restriction which is there on the use of certain resources, right? If you have certain restrictions while using a particular resource, for example, the availability of the resource is less, right? It is very less available or scarcely available. So that is obviously a constraint, right? That is a restriction on your usage. Or if you have very less time to produce a product, then again that is another restriction, a restriction on time. Or if you have less labors available, then again that is another restriction. So constraint मतलब अगर आप कुछ भी कर रहे हो उसमें कोई बाधा आ रहा है, so that constraints. There should be limitation or restrictions relating to the use of certain resources. These constraints are denoted by in equation having this is your less than or equal sign, and this is your greater than or equal to sign. Now you will understand this afterwards. Okay. In some cases, the equation may be denoted by using equal to sign, right? So in this case, what happens? This thing you need to understand. Whatever resources you are consuming, that should be less than or equal to the availability of that resource. Obviously, if you have 1000 kilo of product X available, then you can consume only 1000 kilos, right? You cannot consume more than what is available. अगर आपके पास 10 रोटीज हैं खाने के लिए, ठीक है, तो आप 10 रोटीज ही खा पाओगे ना, उससे ज्यादा तो नहीं खा पाओगे, राइट? So similarly, whatever resources are available with you, you can consume only that much or up to that much. So your consumption of resources is either less than or equal to the availability of resources, right? Coming back to this particular example. So in this case, we have to understand the constraint function. So constraint function will be what? This is one product, that is your X, and this is one product, that is your Y. So in this case, it is given in the question that the amount of raw material which is available to you. So to produce 1 unit of product X, you need to have 10 kgs of raw material, 10 kilograms of raw material. Similarly, to manufacture 1 unit of product Y, you need to have 5 kgs of raw material. And what is the total availability of raw material? That is 4000 kg, right? This is your availability, and these two things are your consumption. So recently, just now we studied that your consumption should always be less than or equal to the total availability of the raw material, availability of the resource, right? So in this case, we know that already we have taken the number of units produced is, okay, let me write this here. Number of units of X is small x, and number of Y is small y, right? So just to avoid confusion, we have written it here. So in this case, what happens? This is your consumption and this is your availability. So obviously, to produce 1 unit of X, you need 10 kgs. So to produce X number of units, you need how many kgs? 10x. And also to produce Y units of product Y, you need 5y, right? Because for 1 unit you need 5. So for Y number of units, you need 5y. So if you add these two things, this is the total consumption. So it has to be less than or equal to your total availability of raw materials, right? I hope this is clear. Similarly, labor is another resource that we have here. So in this case also, to produce 1 unit of product X, we need 5 hours. 5 hours of labor, right? Similarly, for to produce 1 unit of Y, we need 4 hours of labor. And the total availability of labor hours is how much? 2500 labor hours, right? So this is our availability of resource and this is the consumption. So how many units you need to produce for X? That is small x. So you need total how many hours to produce X number of units of product X? That is 5x, right? Similarly, how many hours do you need to produce Y number of units of product Y? That is 4y. So this will be 5x plus 4y is less than equal to 2500. I hope this is clear. So again, here another condition is given in the question, that is minimum 1000 units of X are to be sold. So you have to produce at least 1000 units of product X, and no such condition is given for product Y. So this means what? Minimum 1000 units of X you have to make. So the number of units of X to be produced has to be more than or equal to 1000. Why? Because इसने बोला है at least इतना produce होना है, कम से कम 1000 units होगा. Minimum 1000 units you have to produce. So the number of units to be produced is more than and equal to 1000, right? And at the end you have to write another thing, that is your non-negative function, which is written as your all the decision variables are more than and equal to 0. So this signifies that all the decision variables whichever you have taken, they are not negative, they are not in negation, right? They are either more or equal to 0. I hope this is clear. Here we have another question, so let's solve this. A company is producing 2 products X and Y which have contribution per unit rupees 3 and rupees 4. So whenever we see any word like profit, contribution or sales, so in this case we can understand that here the objective function is to maximize the contribution, right? It is the maximization of contribution. And company wants to maximize contribution, obviously, but company has only 2000 kilograms of raw material and 1000 labor hours available. So in this case, what are the scarcely available resources? One is the raw material and secondly the labor hours, right? Product A takes 5 kgs of raw material and 2 hours for 1 unit to manufacture, and B takes 10 kgs of raw material and 3 hours to produce 1 unit. Now you have to formulate your linear programming problem. So in this question, small correction is needed. This is not product A, this is product X. This is not product B, this is product Y. Okay. So after this, here we need to formulate a linear programming problem. Now remember that in your examination, nobody is going to ask you to solve all the equations. You simply have to formulate the problems, right? And after formulation of the problems, that is the answer. You don't have to solve the equations to find the value of X and Y, right? Now, let's come to the solution of this. So now let's come to the solution of this question. Here, what is the objective function? The objective function is maximization of contribution, right? In words, we can write maximization of contribution. Now, in this case, what are the finished goods? The finished goods are X and Y, right? And also we have been given that to produce 1 unit of product X, you need 5 kilograms of raw material and 2 hours of labor, right? So in this case, like what will be the maximization function? What will be the objective function? Now you have read in the question that the contribution per unit of X is ₹3. So from 1 unit, like after manufacturing 1 unit of product X, you will get ₹3 as the contribution. And after manufacturing 1 unit of product Y, you will get 4 rupees as your contribution from 1 unit, right? So in this case, we need to formulate the equation on how many units to be produced of both the products X and Y in order to maximize the contribution, right? So in this case, let the units of product X and product Y to be manufactured are A and B respectively. You can take small x and small y also, that is not an issue. You can take the decision variables of your choice. Here I have taken A and B respectively. So in this case, your objective function will be what? Maximize Z equals to, from 1 unit of X, how much rupees you are getting? ₹3. So the total contribution from the entire production of product X will be how much? 3 multiplied with the number of units produced of X, that is Y, that is A, right? So this will be contribution into number of units of X, that is 3 multiplied with A, that is 3A. So here we are talking about maximization of contribution of the entire organization. So we need to add the total contribution of both the products, that is X and Y, right? So in this case, what will you write? 3A is the total contribution of product X, and similarly from 1 unit of product Y, what is the amount of contribution you are getting? That is 4. And how many units of Y are to be produced? That is B, right? So that will be 4 multiplied with B. So your objective function will be maximize Z equals to 3A plus 4B, right? I hope this is clear. Now coming to the second part of the solution, that is constraint function. So in constraint function, first you need to make a table like this. So in this case, uh, raw material and labors. These two are the limiting factors, or we can say the key factors in the manufacturing of product X and Y. So this here you can either write A or you can write X. This is your product Y. So in this case, the raw material is what? The raw material you need to manufacture 1 unit of X is 5 kg and 1 unit of Y is 10 kg, right? And labor hours you need for manufacturing of 1 unit of X is 2 hours and manufacturing of 1 unit of Y is 3 hours. And what is the total availability? Availability of raw material is 2000 kilograms and availability of labor hours is your 1000 labor hours, right? So in this case, we know that consumption should always be less than or equal to your total availability, right? So in this case, what will be the two constraint functions? So here the units of X and Y are A and B, right? So 5 kg into number of units of X, that is your A, 5A plus 10B, because the total raw material we are talking about. So we need to add the raw material consumption of both the products. One is X and another one is Y. So we need to add the consumption of both X and Y, and the total addition should be less than or equal to 2000, because we have only 2000 kgs available with us. So obviously our consumption cannot be more than the availability. 5A plus you need 10 kgs of raw material to manufacture 1 unit of Y. So the number of units of Y is B. So it will be 10B. And it should be less than equal to 2000. Similarly, the labor hours will be 2A plus 3B less than equal to 1000 labor hours, right? So these two are your constraint functions, right? Similarly, at the end of the solution, we need to provide a non-negative function which says that whatever decision variables we have taken in the question, in the solution, those are more than or equal to 0. Like both the decision variables, those are A and B, they are not negative, right? They are your positive numbers or they are 0. So A and B both are more than or equal to 0, right? I hope this is clear. So this was all about your linear programming theory, and we also did 2 examples on this. I hope you have understood the last example. Now we need to understand that whatever equations we formed here, these equations equal? No, they are unequal equations, right? And in the linear programming problem, we have a provision of converting the unequal equations into equal equations. How? For that, we need to introduce slack variables in the equations. So what do you mean by slack variables? This variable will be used when we are converting less than type equation. For example, X plus Y is less than 1000. So when we are converting this into equal type equations, so this will be X plus Y. So because there is a difference here, so we need to add another variable which will help us bridge the gap, right? This will be your S1. So whenever we are introducing any slack variable in the solution, we need to write it as S1 or S2 or S3 like that. So in this case, we can say that slack variable will be 0, or it is more than 0, but obviously it is not less than 0, right? I hope this is clear. Now I know this is a bit confusing, but once we start solving a question, you will be clear about this in your head. Now, what is the meaning of surplus variable? This variable will be used when we are converting more than type equation. So when we are talking about less than type equation, so in that case, whatever variable we are introducing, that is known as your slack variable, because it is it is bridging the gap in the unequal equation. Similarly, when we are talking about more than type equation, what do you mean by more than type equation? X plus y is more than 1000. So in this case, when we are trying to convert this into a equal type equation, equal to wala equation, so in this case we need to say that slack variable will be 0 or more than 0 but not less than 0, and that particular variable is known as your surplus variable. And again, this surplus variable is also denoted as S1 or S2, right? I hope this is clear. So here is a solution, here is an example based on that. Solve or formulate the linear programming in the above example in equal to form. What do you mean by above example? This particular question which we have just solved, right? So in this particular question, we have to write it as your equal to form, right? So we need to introduce slack variable. So the objective function will be very similar to the previous one, maximize z, that is equal to 3a plus 4b. But here the difference will be made in the constraint function. Why? Because this is already an equal to equation. But the constraint function was what? It was less than or equal to type, right? And we need to convert this into equal to. So in this case, what happens? 5a plus 10b plus slack variable is S1, that is equal to 2000. And the second constraint function will be what? 2a plus 3b plus S2. Whatever the numbers, whatever the figures were there, all those figures will be there. Simply you need to write S1 and S2, which will convert the unequal equation into an equal one, right? So this will be 2a plus 3b plus S2, that is equal to 1000. Now the biggest change in this is you have to mention in the non-negative function that along with a and b you have S1 and S2, which are your slack variables. Again, they are non-negative variables, and they are more than or equal to 0, right? I hope this is clear. So I know there are a lot of students who are getting confused about the slack variable. So let me give you a very basic example. For example, this is an equation. I know this is not an equation, but try to understand it like this. So 10 plus 8 is less than or equal to 20, right? This is what? This is your 18. So this is a less than situation. In this case, if we have to convert this particular thing into a equal equation, so what do we need to write? 10 plus 8 plus 2 equal to 20. So here in this case, to convert this unequal equation into an equal one, what did we do? We simply introduced another number which will equate this, right? This with this, which will equate both left hand side and right hand side. Similarly, in case of linear programming, we are doing the very same thing, right? Whichever role number 2 played here, the same role is being played by the slack variables. How? X plus y plus S1 equals to 20, right? So this is the basic of slack variable. I hope now you have understood this. So here very briefly we will understand the steps for LLP. You need to define the variables, or we can say the decision variables, which are A, B, C, or X1, X2, or X3, or X, Y, Z, whatever you find easier. Then you need to define the objective function, that is either maximization or minimization, right? Depending upon what is the question asking you. Next, the third point says you have to define the constraints for each limited resource, that is your more than equal to sign, or less than equal to, or even equal to. And the last point says you have to define the non-negative constraints, which are like x1, x2, or x3 up to xn more than equal to 0. This means that whatever decision variables we have used in this in the solution, they are not negative. They are either equal to or they are more than 0, right? I hope this is clear. And from next class onwards, we will start with the solution of the questions given in the study material. So if you really find my channel insightful and helpful to you, then do not forget to hit the like button in this video and subscribe to my channel, the Witty Turtle. And also don't forget to share this channel with your CA, CMA, CMA Inter, CMA Final friends, so that everybody can be benefited by the classes that I upload.